I'm Stephen Page from Page, Provan Family Fertility Lawyers, and I'm talking about surrogacy in Mexico for Australians. I've had clients go to Mexico for surrogacy in small numbers since 2014, and there have been a lot of headlines about problems in Mexico with surrogacy. But one thing that I've seen clearly since 2014 is that there's been no difficulty at all, no substantial difficulty at all in the Australian intended parents having their babies come home. Because after the child is born, what I've seen in the last 10 years is it's typically about 8 weeks after the child is born before the child can leave Mexico. And it's a bit of a quirk. It's to do with US processes with the passports, but the parents won't be bringing the baby back through the US via LA, as you'd expect, or San Francisco, but either going north to Vancouver and the Air Canada flight to Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, or down via Santiago in Chile, and then back the long way. That process, that 8 weeks, blew out by 2 weeks during the pandemic, and that's it. When the rest of the world was falling apart, this process remained pretty stable. So one thing we can be sure about, that if done carefully, there shouldn't be a problem bringing the baby home back to Australia. And when the child comes back to Australia, the child will already be, by that stage, an Australian citizen, recognised by the Australian government, and holding an Australian emergency passport. Mexico is the world's largest Spanish country. It's got 110 million people, and it has 31 states. It's a federation like Australia, so it's really complex. 10 years ago, where Australians were going to was the state of Tabasco. So if you look at the map of Mexico, and it's got the little hook, it was in the bottom of that hook. And there was a bit of a gold rush. Suddenly everyone was going to Tabasco because it had liberal laws concerning surrogacy. So the first illustration is that every state has its own laws, and most states are silent about surrogacy. There are between 2 and 5 states in Mexico that specifically ban surrogacy. But this gold mine really took off, and then there was news about an American Indian guy, or I should say an Indian American guy, called Rudy Rupak, in the New York Times and Australia's ABC, wrote stories where they said he was trafficking Colombian women to Mexico to be surrogates, and his agency was a Ponzi scheme. So he shut down. Tabasco said, well, we're not allowing any foreigners here, no gays, so close all the surrogacy down in effect. And ultimately the FBI caught up with Rudy Rupak and he went to jail. But surrogacy in Mexico has continued for Australians in small numbers, and most recently Australians have gone to 2 states, Quintana Roo, which is the city of Cancun, and Mexico City itself. Mexico has a reputation for 2 things: violence, particularly in the north, Sinaloa and similar states, and corruption. So one must be very careful in going to Mexico about choosing the surrogacy agency, because there's a variety of surrogacy agencies, some which are reputable and good, and some I wouldn't touch. I wouldn't poke with a stick. Then with the IVF clinics, the difficulty about choosing IVF clinics in Mexico is that you're peering into a deep, dark black hole. In Australia, we've got the Australian New Zealand Assisted Reproductive Database, ANZARD, the oldest assisted reproductive database in the world, and it has data on it showing how the industry is going. And on top of that, most Australian clinics have signed up to yourivfsuccess.com.au. And so you've got individual data for individual clinics. You can see what the success rates are. Mexico, it's nothing. They've got to be registered with the federal government, but you can't tell how they're going. So you've got to be very careful about the IVF clinic. I've had 2 cases now where IVF clinic in Cancun has, and I'm not sure that it's the same clinic, has made mistakes. In one case it chose the wrong embryo, and in the second case, lo and behold, it chose the wrong embryo. So one must be careful with the IVF clinic. And then finally, one must be careful with the lawyer. And aside from the issue of corruption, there is a real basic problem in Mexico about how you do surrogacy. And that's because there are 2 significant decisions of the Supreme Court of Mexico concerning surrogacy. One was from 2018 and one was from 2021. So I'll deal with the 2021 case first. It involved a gay couple from Spain who were going to Mexico, and lo and behold, they went to Tabasco, so the place that said no foreigners, no gays. They weren't very happy about that, and they ended up in the Supreme Court of Mexico, which held that those laws in Tabasco were invalid. Goodbye laws, because Mexico was okay with gays. And Mexico was okay with foreigners, that foreigners had the same rules and entitlements, same human rights as locals. So that decision is significant because it provides in many ways a protective balance, blanket over surrogacy in Mexico, that Mexican state governments, if they want to ban surrogacy, have to ban it for locals as well as foreigners. So I think change by state governments will be a long time coming. Let's see. The other decision from 2018 was even, in my view, more significant. It involved a gay couple from Yucatan. So if we look at the bump, it's on the bump, and they wanted to be recognised as the parents. Well, the local state registration authority said, no. The intended father, the biological father goes on, the surrogate having given birth goes on. Mexican Supreme Court said, no, they're not the parents, based on procreative intent, which I've talked about in a number of my videos about who's a parent, who intends to be a parent. The intended parents were the parents. The gay couple were the parents. Therefore, they ought to be recognised. Now, why this is significant is because some agencies, some lawyers in Mexico and some states say who goes on the register is the surrogate and one of the biological father. But with some lawyers and in some places in Mexico, you can achieve, consistent with that decision, that the intended parents are recognised as the parents and not the surrogate. Imagine coming home and one of you is not recognised as a parent. That's what's happened to plenty of people who've gone to Mexico. And there are band-aid ways of doing it. We'd put a parenting plan in place to cover it, and if they want to then go through a step-parent adoption process, but that is slow, it's expensive, and it may be problematic depending on where they live. Much better at the beginning of the piece not to go through that process. And of course, I've got to say, with any foreign country, that in 3 places, Queensland, the ACT and New South Wales, it may be a criminal offence in engaging in commercial surrogacy in Mexico. If you live in one of those places, or in the case of New South Wales, if you're domiciled there, get legal advice here first before entering into the surrogacy arrangement. And It may also be an offence if you're from South Australia, the Northern Territory or WA, so get legal advice first. If you engage in egg donation in Mexico, it can be a criminal offence in everywhere but Victoria and Tasmania, so get advice before you sign the agreement with an egg donor there. And finally, if you're engaging in adoption in Mexico, it almost certainly will be an offence in every Australian state and territory. So get advice at the beginning. Don't do what some of my clients have done, which is, here is the agreement that we've signed. And I go, oh, I've got to rewrite it. Make it easy, less stressful and cheaper by doing it at the beginning. Get the advice now, when you're starting the journey, not midway through and not at the end. Thank you. I'm Stephen Page from Page Proven Family and Fertility Lawyers. Thank you for listening and watching.